October 17th, 9:42 p.m. A crowded apartment in the city, music leaking through the walls like static. The room is loud, glasses clinking, voices overlapping, someone laughing just a little too hard at something that wasn't that funny. Warm light hangs over everything, golden and forgiving. But in the far corner, near the bookshelf no one touches, someone has gone quiet. Not awkward, not anxious. Just still. He stands there, fingers resting against a cold glass he hasn't sipped in 10 minutes. Watching, listening, not to the words, to the patterns beneath them, the repetition. The subtle shifts in tone when someone's name comes up, the way one friend mirrors another's opinion before the sentence even finishes, the nervous laugh that follows a half-truth. You can almost feel the fatigue settling behind his eyes. This isn't shyness. It's pattern recognition. At 9:47 p.m. someone nudges him. "You're so quiet tonight, what's wrong?" Nothing is wrong. But something has been seen. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. There's a moment in emotional development that doesn't arrive loudly. No fireworks, no dramatic confrontation. It arrives like this, in the middle of noise, when you suddenly realize you're not entertained anymore. Not because you've grown cold. Because you've grown aware. Jungian psychology speaks of the unconscious not as something abstract, but as something that moves through people constantly, shaping their words, reactions, alliances, insecurities. Most conversations are not conscious exchanges. They are scripts, archetypes speaking to archetypes. The performer. The victim. The hero. The cynic. And once you begin to recognize these roles, the magic trick loses its sparkle. You notice how the confident one only tells stories where they win. How the chill one subtly tests everyone for approval. How tension rises whenever silence lasts longer than 3 seconds. You see the loops. And you grow tired. Not of people. Of repetition. At 9:53 p.m., someone across the room is defending an opinion they don't even fully believe. You can see it in their micro-hesitation, in the way their shoulders stiffen. They're not protecting truth, they're protecting identity. And suddenly, something shifts inside you. You don't feel the urge to correct them. You don't feel the urge to argue. You don't even feel the urge to participate. You feel distance. And that distance can look like withdrawal to others. But inside, it feels like clarity. Jung suggested that as consciousness expands, participation in the collective unconscious becomes optional. You begin to choose where your energy goes. You begin to sense when a conversation is not an exchange but a reenactment. And reenactments are exhausting. 10:02 p.m. The music gets louder, a debate flares near the kitchen island. Someone misinterprets something small and suddenly it's personal. Voices tighten. He watches the escalation like someone observing weather patterns. Predictable. The same emotional triggers, the same defensive posture, the same need to win. And here, the realization, the one that changes everything. Silence is not the absence of strength. It is the refusal to feed unconscious cycles. You've done the arguing before. You've done the over-explaining. You've tried to smooth tensions, fix misunderstandings, clarify intentions. And what did it cost? Energy. Sleep. Self-trust. At some point, awareness stops being exciting and starts being heavy. Because you can see the outcome before the argument begins. And once you see that, you begin conserving yourself. There is a specific kind of loneliness that comes with heightened awareness. It's not isolation. It's dissonance. You feel slightly out of sync with the room, like you're tuned to a frequency just a bit lower, slower, deeper, while everyone else is surfing surface waves. You're studying the tide. People misread that. They call it insecurity. They call it detachment. They call it moodiness. But what if it's discernment? What if silence is simply the mind stepping back to avoid noise that no longer nourishes it? 10:11 p.m. Someone makes a joke at his expense, light, playful, socially acceptable. The room laughs, eyes turn toward him, waiting for a response. This is the moment the old version would perform. Smile, fire back, keep the rhythm alive. Instead, he just nods slightly. Not wounded. Not offended. Just uninterested. The joke doesn't land because he doesn't need to defend an image anymore. And that's when something subtle happens. The room adjusts. People become slightly uneasy when someone refuses to play their assigned role. The social ecosystem depends on predictable responses. When you stop reacting as expected, you disrupt the pattern. Silence in that moment becomes power, not dominance. Stability. Carl Jung described individuation as the process of becoming psychologically distinct from the collective, not in arrogance but in authenticity. And individuation is quiet work. It doesn't announce itself at parties. It observes. It withdraws energy from the unnecessary. It lets others project without scrambling to correct the projection. You realize something profound. You don't have to participate in every narrative about you. You don't have to clarify every misunderstanding. You don't have to prove depth to those who are comfortable in shallows. And this realization changes the way you occupy space. You begin to speak less. But when you speak, it matters. 10:19 p.m. The debate in the kitchen burns out. People check their phones, the energy dips. Someone suggests shots to revive the mood. He steps out onto the balcony. Cold air. City noise below, distant sirens, traffic humming like a living organism. And finally quiet. Not imposed. Chosen. He leans against the railing and exhales. It's not that he dislikes people. It's that he's learning to filter what deserves his attention. Awareness without boundaries leads to burnout. Awareness with restraint becomes wisdom. But here's the part no one talks about. When you grow quiet, some people will grow suspicious. Because your silence forces them to hear themselves. And not everyone likes that echo. Inside the apartment, someone glances toward the balcony door. Is he okay? The question hangs. He is more than okay. He is seeing clearly. And clarity changes relationships. What happens next is not louder. It's deeper. The balcony door slides shut behind him with a soft click. Inside, the music swells again, bass vibrating faintly through the glass, but out here, the night air carries something steadier. Sirens wail in the distance. A train rattles over steel tracks somewhere beyond the buildings. The city moves in patterns too. He rests his forearms on the railing and watches headlights stream below like veins of light. Traffic flows, stops, flows again. Predictable. That's the word that's been following him lately. Predictable. Not in a cynical way, not in a bitter way. In a way that feels mathematical. You start noticing that every argument has a pre-argument, a subtle tightening, a shift in tone, a micro-expression that announces the storm before the thunder. You notice that certain people only call when they need validation. That apologies follow the same script every time. That the friend who hates drama is always standing at its center. And once you see it, your nervous system adjusts. You no longer brace for surprise. You brace for repetition. Inside the apartment, a glass shatters, laughter follows, someone cheers. Out here, he doesn't flinch. There's a difference between being sensitive and being perceptive. Sensitivity absorbs everything. Perception filters. Jung wrote about the development of consciousness as a painful expansion. The more aware you become of unconscious behavior, the less enchanted you are by it. The collective dances in patterns it does not see, and the one who sees them often feels exiled from the dance floor. Not because he believes he is better. Because he can't unlearn what he has learned. And here is the truth most people don't admit. Heightened awareness is exhausting. It means noticing when someone's smile doesn't reach their eyes. It means sensing resentment before it's spoken. It means recognizing projection disguised as concern. You begin anticipating emotional, whether the way sailors read clouds. And eventually, you grow tired of forecasting storms no one else sees coming. There was a time he thought his quietness was a flaw. In college, professors would write it in evaluations. Intelligent but reserved. Needs to participate more. Friends would say, "You're so hard to read." As if visibility equaled value. So he tried. He forced commentary. Forced reactions. Forced presence. And each time he walked home drained, not from socializing, but from performing against his own rhythm. Because when you speak before your thoughts are ready, you fracture something inside. and fractures accumulate. Back inside, someone opens the balcony door halfway. "You disappeared," she says, stepping out. Her name is Mara. She smells faintly of citrus and smoke. He shrugs lightly, "Just needed air." She studies him. "You always do this when it gets intense." "Always." There it is again, the pattern recognition turning back on him. He doesn't correct her. Because explaining nuance to someone who isn't asking for depth is another form of exhaustion. Instead, he asks, "Does it ever feel repetitive to you?" She laughs softly. "What does?" "All of it. The arguments. The alliances. The emotional loops." She looks confused for half a second, then amused. "That's just people." "Exactly. That's just people." But what if just people isn't enough anymore? Individuation, the process of becoming psychologically whole, often begins with withdrawal, not isolation, withdrawal. You retract energy from environments that demand unconscious participation. You stop volunteering yourself for roles you've outgrown. The peacemaker, the comedian, the therapist. Roles once worn with pride. Now they feel heavy. Because once you see how often people avoid self-reflection by outsourcing it to you, silence becomes protection. Not protection from harm. Protection from depletion. Mara leans beside him at the railing. "You think too much," she says playfully. He smiles faintly. Thinking too much. That's what observation fatigue looks like from the outside. But inside, it doesn't feel like overthinking. It feels like pattern saturation. When your mind begins categorizing behaviors automatically. When you can predict someone's response 3 sentences ahead. When you feel the script tightening before the actors realize they're reading it. Silence becomes the only honest response. Because speaking would mean pretending you don't see the strings. A car alarm blares somewhere below, then cuts off abruptly. He turns to her. "Do you ever feel like everyone's reacting to ghosts?" Ghosts. Old wounds, old identities, things that aren't even happening right now. She considers it longer this time. Sometimes people don't lack awareness. They lack language. And when you've spent years studying the emotional undercurrents of rooms, you develop language others don't yet use. That gap creates distance. Not superiority. Distance. Mara's phone buzzes, she checks it and sighs. They're arguing again about that thing from last month. Of course they are. The same unresolved tension, wearing new clothes. He nods unsurprised. This is the quiet tragedy of awareness. You start grieving conversations before they finish. You already know the ending. You know who will feel unheard. Who will overreact. Who will retreat and pretend it's fine. And so you withdraw early. Not from cowardice. From conservation. She studies him again more seriously now. You don't get angry like you used to. Anger once felt like engagement. Like vitality. Now it feels like entanglement. "I just don't think everything needs my reaction," he replies. That's the sentence. That's the shift. Silence is not the absence of courage. It is the refinement of response. When you were younger, you fought to be understood. Now you fight to remain centered. And those are two very different battles. Inside, voices rise again, not shouting, sharper than that, defensive. Mara glances toward the door. "I should probably go diffuse it." He nods. She pauses before stepping back in. "You're not weak for stepping away, you know." The words land heavier than she intends. Because weakness has always been the accusation hidden beneath quiet. Weak for not dominating conversations. Weak for not asserting. Weak for not performing outrage on cue. But what if restraint requires more strength than reaction? The door closes again. He stands alone on the balcony. Below, traffic keeps moving, patterns unfolding in red and white light. And for the first time tonight, he feels something settle. Not loneliness. Discernment. He isn't withdrawing from life. He's selecting it. But selection changes who remains around you. And inside that apartment, the energy is shifting in response to his absence. What happens when your silence begins to expose others? 10:37 p.m. Inside the apartment, the laughter is thinner now, not gone, just strained at the edges. The argument that reignited in the kitchen has split the room into quiet factions. 2 by the sink, 3 near the couch, someone scrolling aggressively on their phone as if the screen might validate them. And then there's the empty space by the bookshelf, where he used to stand. Absence has weight. You don't realize how much stabilizing energy you bring into a room until you remove it. On the balcony, he hears the sliding door open again, but this time it's not Mara. It's Daniel. Daniel moves like someone who's trying not to look agitated, jaw tight, shoulders squared, controlled breathing that isn't as controlled as he thinks. You always bail when things get real, Daniel says, leaning against the opposite railing. There's no accusation in the words. But there's tension. And here it is, the pattern surfacing again. Projection often seeks the quietest surface. He doesn't respond immediately, not to provoke, not to calculate, simply to feel what's true before speaking. This pause unsettles Daniel more than any rebuttal would. You think you're above it, Daniel continues, like you're observing us. There it is. The discomfort of being seen. When you grow quiet out of discernment, people often interpret it as judgment. Because silence removes the reassurance of participation. You're no longer laughing on cue. No longer nodding automatically. No longer validating reactions you don't internally align with. And that absence creates a vacuum. Humans dislike vacuums. We rush to fill them with assumptions. You think you're better. You're detached. You don't care. But what if caring deeply is exactly why you stopped engaging superficially? I don't think I'm above anything, he says calmly. Daniel scoffs softly, then why do you always step back? Because stepping in used to cost me myself. But that's not a sentence you throw into an emotionally charged moment. Instead, he says, I step back when it feels like no one's actually listening. Silence. Daniel looks away first. Inside the apartment, someone's voice cracks mid-sentence, a fragile tremor disguised as volume. That's the thing about unconscious conflict. It feeds on reaction. When you refuse to provide fuel, the fire searches for oxygen elsewhere. And sometimes it turns toward you. Jung believed that what irritates us about others often reveals something unresolved within ourselves. The psyche protects its blind spots fiercely. When you embody restraint in a reactive environment, you become a mirror. Not because you're perfect. Because you're not participating. And mirrors are confrontational without saying a word. Daniel rubs the back of his neck. It's just when you go quiet like that, it's like you're judging everyone. He studies Daniel carefully. Is that what it feels like? Judgment. Or exposure? There's a difference. Judgment says you're wrong. Exposure says this is what's happening. And exposure makes people uneasy when they aren't ready to see themselves. You ever notice, he says slowly, how we argue about the same things every month? Daniel's jaw tightens again. He has noticed. Of course he has. But noticing requires responsibility. And responsibility is heavier than reaction. We're just passionate, Daniel replies. That word. Passionate. A noble disguise for repetition. He nods gently, maybe. No sarcasm, no pushback. Just space. And space is dangerous when someone is used to resistance. Because without resistance, there's nothing to push against. Daniel exhales sharply, you used to jump in. I used to think jumping in helped. The sentence lands like a quiet verdict. Inside, a chair scrapes loudly against hardwood. The argument has collapsed into silence. Not resolution. Collapse. You can feel the emotional debris settling. This is what observation fatigue does over time. You begin grieving cycles before they start. You stop confusing intensity with depth. You stop equating noise with connection. And something subtle shifts in your identity. You no longer measure your presence by how much space you fill. You measure it by how much unnecessary movement you avoid. Daniel stares out at the city now, mirroring his posture unconsciously. You don't get tired of holding everything in, he asks. There it is again, the assumption. That silence equals suppression. But suppression feels tight. Defensive. Pressurized. This feels different. I'm not holding it in, he says quietly. I just don't feel the need to react to everything anymore. Daniel doesn't respond immediately. Because somewhere inside, that sentence makes sense. Reaction is addictive. It creates identity quickly. The angry one. The righteous one. The victim. Silence dismantles those instant identities. It forces you to sit with something slower. Something less dramatic. Something internal. You can almost feel the shift happening in real time. Daniel's breathing steadies. His posture softens. Without an opponent, his nervous system recalibrates. This is the paradox. When you refuse to play your assigned role in someone else's unconscious script, they're forced to either escalate or reflect. And escalation requires energy. Reflection requires courage. Maybe I just don't like feeling exposed, Daniel mutters almost to himself. Honesty rarely arrives loudly. It slips out. Unprotected. He doesn't capitalize on it. Doesn't nod triumphantly. Just lets it exist between them. Because silence isn't about winning. It's about not feeding what shouldn't grow. The balcony door opens again. Mara steps out, eyes scanning both of them. It's over, she says, for now. For now. The cycle will try again next month. It always does. Unless someone changes their role. Mara looks at him differently now. Not confused. Curious. What were you two talking about? Daniel hesitates. Then shrugs, nothing, just patterns. She glances at him, a small smile touches her lips. Maybe she's starting to see it too. Because awareness spreads quietly. It doesn't dominate. It resonates. 11:02 p.m. The party has thinned. People are gathering coats, avoiding eye contact with the person they argued with, pretending normalcy has returned. But something is different. The emotional charge never reached its usual peak. It fizzled sooner. Because one person didn't amplify it. One person stepped back. And the system recalibrated around that absence. Silence can destabilize chaos. But it also reorders it. As they prepare to leave, Daniel pauses near the door. You're not weak, he says abruptly, not quite meeting his eyes. I think you're just ahead of it. Ahead of it. No. Just unwilling to repeat it. He steps into the hallway, cool fluorescent light replacing the warm glow of the apartment. And here's the deeper realization settling in. Silence isn't isolation. It's filtration. But filtration changes your circle. Because not everyone is comfortable being seen clearly. And the more precise your awareness becomes, the fewer places will feel aligned. 11:18 p.m. The hallway smells faintly of detergent and old carpet. The door clicks shut behind them. Inside, the apartment returns to its usual hum, muted apologies, careful laughter, the fragile stitching of temporary peace. But out here, under fluorescent light, something irreversible has happened. You can feel it. Not in drama. In distance. They walk toward the elevator in silence, Mara scrolling, Daniel staring ahead. He watches their reflections in the brushed steel doors, three figures side by side but internally miles apart. Growth rarely announces itself with applause. It rearranges proximity. The elevator descends slowly. Floors passing like stages of a former self. The version of him who needed to win arguments. The version who overexplained to avoid being misunderstood. The version who mistook intensity for intimacy. Each one feels farther away now. And here's the quiet truth no one romanticizes. When you outgrow unconscious cycles, you don't just lose arguments. You lose alignment. Because many relationships are built not on awareness, but on shared reactivity. Shared complaints. Shared enemies. Shared emotional spikes. When you stop reacting the same way, the bond shifts. Sometimes it deepens. Sometimes it dissolves. The elevator doors open into the lobby. Cool night air slips in as someone exits the building. The city feels calmer now, less theatrical, more honest. Daniel stops near the entrance. We're grabbing food, he says to Mara, you coming? She hesitates, glances at him. Then back at Daniel. There it is again, the subtle fork in the road. Noise or quiet? Familiar or unfamiliar? Cycle or shift? I think I'm heading home, he says before she answers. No tension. No resentment. Just clarity. Daniel nods once, all right. There's no argument, no persuasion. Because something in Daniel understands now. You don't drag someone back into a role they've outgrown. You either evolve with them, or you watch them walk. Outside, the air is colder than before. He steps onto the sidewalk alone. The city at night has its own kind of silence, not the absence of sound, but the absence of expectation. No one here needs him to perform, no one is scanning his reactions. And for the first time tonight, his nervous system fully relaxes. This is what discernment feels like in the body. Not tense. Not guarded. Spacious. You begin to realize that silence isn't something you're doing. It's something you've become. Because awareness reorganizes your energy automatically. You stop chasing stimulation. Stop volunteering commentary. Stop filling empty air just to keep others comfortable. And that makes some people uncomfortable. A text buzzes in his pocket. Mara, are you pulling away from us? He stops walking under a streetlight. There it is, the fear beneath the curiosity. He types, deletes, types again. Finally, I'm pulling away from patterns that drain me, not from you. 3 dots appear almost immediately. Then disappear. Then return. Change unsettles people who benefit from your old participation. Because when you withdraw from unconscious roles, others are forced to confront theirs. She replies, it just feels like you don't need us the same way. He exhales slowly. Need. That word carries weight. Needing people for validation, for distraction, for identity reinforcement, that's common. Choosing people consciously. That's rarer. Maybe I just need something different now, he sends. Honest. Unapologetic. And terrifying in its simplicity. There's a grief that accompanies individuation. Not dramatic heartbreak. Subtle mourning. You grieve the version of yourself who fit seamlessly into noise. Who bonded through shared outrage. Who felt closeness through chaos. Because that version had belonging. This version has peace. And peace can feel lonely at first. Jung understood that the path towards psychological wholeness often feels like exile before it feels like home. When you withdraw from collective unconscious behavior, you stand slightly outside the tribe. And tribes interpret difference as distance. But here's the deeper layer. Silence isn't withdrawal from connection. It's withdrawal from unconscious connection. You're not seeking fewer people. You're seeking fewer performances. He reaches a small park 2 blocks from the apartment. Benches empty, trees swaying gently, the city's noise softened by leaves. He sits, breath visible in the cold. And he asks himself something he hasn't asked before. Am I becoming isolated or intentional? The answer isn't immediate. Because discernment requires recalibration. When you've spent years reacting, the absence of reaction feels unnatural at first. You might mistake stillness for emptiness. But they're not the same. Stillness holds presence. Emptiness seeks filling. He doesn't feel empty. He feels selective. And selection is a form of self-respect. Another text from Mara. I don't think you're weak, I just think you see things I don't always want to. There it is. The mirror. Silence reflects. Not aggressively. Not cruelly. But clearly. And clarity can feel exposing. He doesn't rush to respond. Because not every moment requires immediate reassurance. That's another shift. Silence allows space for others to process without you managing their emotions. That used to be his role. Manager of tension. Translator of feelings. Mediator of conflict. Now, observer. Participant by choice. Speaker when necessary. A couple walks past laughing softly, no performance, no sharp edges. Just ease. That's what he wants now. Conversations that don't feel like strategy. Disagreements that don't spiral into identity threats. Connections that don't depend on constant emotional voltage. Depth without drama. Presence without pressure. And that requires something rare. 2 conscious participants. You can't build conscious connection alone. And that's the next challenge. Because once you recognize patterns, you can't unknow them. And once you stop playing roles, you can't convincingly step back into them. Which means the circle will shrink before it stabilizes. The noise will fade before new resonance appears. The question is, are you strong enough to endure that quiet transition? He looks up at the dark sky above the trees. For the first time, the silence doesn't feel like absence. It feels like alignment. But alignment demands something even more difficult than observation. It demands boundaries. And boundaries will test everything that remains. 11:46 p.m. The park is nearly empty now. A street lamp flickers once, then steadies. Wind moves through the trees in slow, rhythmic breaths. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks and is answered by silence. He sits on the bench, phone dark in his hand. Boundaries. The word feels heavier than silence ever did. Because silence can be misinterpreted. Boundaries cannot. Silence leaves room for assumption. Boundaries remove it. And removal makes things real. His phone buzzes again. Mara, are you going to stop coming around? The old reflex stirs for a moment, soften it, reassure her, make it comfortable. But growth requires tolerating discomfort. Not cruelty. Clarity. He types slowly. No, I'm just not going to participate the same way. There. A line drawn without aggression. You can feel the internal shift when you do this for the first time. Your body braces for backlash, for misunderstanding, for rejection. Because historically, your belonging depended on adaptation. Now it depends on authenticity. And authenticity always filters. Silence without boundaries can become passive. Boundaries without silence can become reactive. But together, they form discernment. This is the part most people skip in their understanding of quietness. They imagine it as retreat, as hiding, as shrinking. But real quietness, the kind born from awareness, is structured. It chooses. It evaluates. It declines. He stands from the bench and begins walking again. Each step feels lighter. Because for the first time, he's not silently tolerating what drains him, he's consciously redefining his engagement. And that changes everything. Think back to the apartment. The argument. The predictable escalation. What if no one interrupted? What if no one reacted defensively? What if someone calmly said, I'm not engaging in this tonight? It would feel disruptive. Even threatening. Because unconscious systems rely on participation. Families do it. Friend groups do it. Workplaces do it. They assign roles. The responsible one. The dramatic one. The calm one. The overreactor. When you step out of your assigned role, the system trembles. Not because you're wrong. Because you're free. His phone lights up once more. Mara, I think I rely on you to keep things stable. There it is. The hidden contract. You stabilize us. You absorb tension. You translate emotions. You soften conflicts. And in return, belonging. But unconscious contracts cost more than they give. He pauses under another streetlight. I can't be the regulator for everyone anymore, he types. I can be present, just not responsible. He sends it before second guessing. This is what emotional maturity looks like in real time. Not dramatic speeches. Not ultimatums. Simple truth. And truth reorganizes relationships faster than conflict ever could. For a moment there is no response. And that silence is different from earlier. This silence is integration. You can almost imagine her reading it slowly, feeling the shift, recognizing that something foundational has changed. Because when you stop managing others' emotions, they are forced to manage their own. And that can feel like abandonment to someone unprepared. But it is actually respect. Respect says, I trust you to handle yourself. Control says, I don't. Silence, when aligned with boundaries, communicates respect. Midnight. The city feels softer now. He reaches his apartment building and stops before going inside. There's a realization settling, not sudden but earned. His quietness was never fear. It was filtration. His distance was never insecurity. It was discernment. And his silence was never weakness. It was pattern recognition. He wasn't shrinking from connection. He was outgrowing unconscious repetition. The hardest part. Not everyone will come with you. Some will label you distant. Some will accuse you of changing. Some will attempt to provoke the old reactions just to feel familiar ground again. But if you hold steady, calm, clear, non-performative, something remarkable happens. The right people lean in. Not because you're loud. Not because you dominate. Not because you entertain. But because your silence feels safe. Grounded. Intentional. And in a world addicted to reaction, grounded presence feels rare. His phone buzzes one last time. Mara. I get it, it's just new. New. That's the word. Growth always feels new before it feels natural. Yeah, he replies. It's new for me too. No defensiveness. No over-explaining. No retreat. Just steady alignment. He unlocks his apartment door. Inside, the space is quiet, not lonely, not hollow, just undisturbed. He sets his keys down and stands still for a moment. Listening. To nothing. And to everything. You might recognize this moment in your own life. When conversations start feeling recycled. When drama feels predictable. When silence feels more nourishing than participation. That isn't social failure. It's psychological evolution. Because once you develop pattern recognition, emotional, relational, behavioral, you can no longer unsee the loops. And once you value your energy, you stop feeding them. The world will call that withdrawal. But it is refinement. It is the shift from reacting to choosing. From managing to discerning. From noise to clarity. And clarity doesn't shout. It stands. Quietly.